how do you overcome crippling perfectionism on your podcast journey, especially if you want to sound and look like a pro, but podcasting is something that you haven't done all your life? Well, if you just tuned in, hello, I'm Anna Xavier. I'm the founder of the podcast space. And in case you didn't know, the motto of this show is making perfect content that moves you forward. And I didn't pick that motto just by, just because. I wanted to inspire podcasters to do changes little by little that help them move forward in their journey, but still be okay and proud of the content that they're creating. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're like, Anna, why is the camera on that different location? All right, my friend. So this week's episode is slightly different for a couple of reasons. One, I want to show you that it's possible to change things up, because normally the camera is in front of my computer where I'm looking at right now. But this time I decided to change things up to disrupt your pattern. And of course, if you're listening to this, you have to go and watch the show, obviously, on YouTube. But truly, it's because sometimes we have to change things up, even for us to know that it's possible to create content differently without having to just put all of these constraints. So I actually picked up the camera and moved it around in a few different positions so that I could show you what it could look like if you're podcasting and all you want to do is just dip your feet into video podcasting, which I've told you before, it's so crucial, and it is the future of podcasting. And so I wanted to tease you and kind of like showcase what it could look like if I wanted to just move myself as I am doing right now, actually just moving forward and reading from the script, and how that camera could look like. Again, I am literally testing this for the first time, and it's just, like, what if you were to just put a camera to the side and continually do your podcast? There's a lot of people who are doing this because they're feeling like, I want to get ready and I'll never be ready if I don't start. So if we were to put a camera like I am right now, like, how bad would it be, right? And then kind of funny enough, reason number 2 that I'm talking about this perfectionism is because I'm actually sick. I got sick over the weekend and my voice is a little like more nasal. I am struggling to speak normally as I do, and to be honest, this podcast is going to be one of those classics. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be doing so much chop, so much cutting. But anyway, I'm still creating content because I want to remind you that it's possible to create content imperfect. And it is like this, is not worrying about, like the camera has to be perfect. I need to have the perfect setup. And to be honest, you're probably going to be looking at a different angle, because my podcast is always shot from the same side. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about my own journey and how I'm overcoming my own perfectionism in like a very specific way. I'm going to give you examples. And because trust me, like every single week I publish an episode that I am not happy about. And so this week's episode is going to be one of those that is like show and tell. But truly, this is about also you understanding that I am overcoming my own perfectionism tendencies. To be honest, I don't even call myself a perfectionist. I think that I have high working standards, and that's what I'm doing. But anyway, the camera is in a different position. I'm going to kind of like be moving toward... I'm moving and I'm just moving into a different position, facing forward. And so let's get into it. First things first, I want to remind you that this is not a thing that like one day you're like, waking up and suddenly perfectionism is gone. It's not like that at all. But it is truly about the journey, right? Like it's about reminding yourself about something very important. And I'm going to slide to the camera and say this because I want to make eye contact with you, which is a camera right now. I want to remind you that whenever you're focused on perfectionism, you're putting the focus on your ego. And that's a problem that most of us have because we keep focusing on how we want to control the perception that others have of us. Whereas it should be the value that we are delivering and how we are teaching our community, how we're helping our community thrive. And so if I am focused in the content, I'm not so worried about little imperfections that may, be present in the content that I'm creating. And so I really want to remind you of being present, and every single time you're doubting yourself, you're thinking, is this an ego thing, or does this piece of content actually need to be improved? Because I'll tell you that probably 9 times out of 10, it's fine. Honestly, I was just having this conversation today. There's a lot of times where I thrive for creating content that is 90% perfect. I don't think that I would be able to create as much content as I do running a business and still being a creative and not killing the joy of creation if I was just always trying to thrive at 100%, because I need those 10%. I need those 20% to just look around me and say, okay, like now I can use those 10% and comment on someone's post or do something else, right? That is more meaningful than just creating, quote unquote, the perfect post to promote the podcast. And so at the end of the day, how I am overcoming perfectionism, I think I do a lot of more quote unquote mistakes lately, on misspelling, because it's been a year, it's been tiring. I'm trying to do a lot of things, and I just don't see the mistakes, right? I'm thinking, okay, this post has to go out, or maybe I'm doing a lot of batching, and maybe I'm just in the process of doing something else and I don't realize that I misspelled something, and it really hurts my soul. But it's funny because sometimes some of the posts that I've posted, I thought, well, should I just remove that post and create something else and just, fix the post and repost it again? Well, the problem is, like, a lot of times, a lot of people already saved it, liked it, sent it. And so I'm like, it's fine. Again, like, it's not, if I'm misspelling my guest's name, 100%, I will take that down and place it back corrected. But if it's just one of those things, like, most people don't even notice. And again, trust me, I don't like doing this. Don't get me wrong. But truly, sometimes that person didn't even notice that misspell. And if you do it scarcely, like, obviously, like, if every single post has a typo, obviously that's not a good thing. You should be paying more attention to your content. But if it's just every now and again in a blue moon, like, honestly, that happens to me more on, for instance, like, stories. So when I'm typing comments or sharing someone's post and I thought that was so great, it's about, a podcast tip that someone shared. A lot of times, especially with the new iOS, okay, this is a side note, but the new iOS is constantly mistyping things. I'm like, I didn't even write that word. What the heck? Anyway, so I'm just like, okay, the value is there. Let's move forward. So I'm going to share with you the 10 things that I overcome as a perfectionist, like things that I create that I know for a fact, and I'm going to, like, slide it back. The 10 things that I normally notice. Oh, actually, you want to use for social media. So here we go. All right. So here are the 10 things that when I'm creating content for my podcast, I'm overcoming either perfectionism tendencies or just like that work ethic that I just try to live by. So let's get into the first one. So the first one is diction. And actually, I covered on last week's episode 45, 3 tips about scripting that I think are super helpful to help people make less mistakes. So a lot of times, and again, I remind you that I did study journalism. I did have vocal classes, but, I didn't really work in radio all of my life. And so basically, you either forget about the skills you have or just, again, also English is not my first language, right? So sounds and words and all of these things, like, I just think that I have better no, I wouldn't say call it proper, but definitely better diction in Portuguese than I have in English. And that has been something that I know it's not perfect, especially I get really, really into this vibe. I'm excited and I talk fast and I'm like, oh, I could probably do a better vocal warm-up on something. But sometimes I'm in the rush. Again, I always tell you about how, like, we're doing the possible, not the perfect. And then number 2, on editing. I do 2 different edits. I record my podcast and then I edit it in the script. I apply a few effects, but y'all, like there are some effects that are actually a little rough. Sometimes like the cuts are not perfect and I'm like, oh, it's gotta go. It's gotta go. I don't have an editor and I do my own marketing. I run a business. I have clients to tend to. So I'm like, okay, does this get into the quality of the content? Most times it doesn't. So by the way, Anna from journalism school would do a perfect transition. She would like, oh my gosh, let's cross, blend, do the thing. And I'm like, no, it's fine. Like, does it make sense? Yes, let's go. And again, I have not, again, the whole message of this show is not to be perfect. If I was talking to you about, how to create a very beautiful pro podcast, like, of course, I would have to put the emphasis because, again, the mission of the podcast is to teach you, like, how to better podcast with video and create better content. But if mine is about content strategy, I don't have that pressure. And so you don't have it too, right? Like these cuts where the video is a little more rough. Sometimes you hear a little bit of breathing on the video editing, but not on the audio. So I actually go on to Audition and apply a few sound effects. I apply a few effects to remove some of the breathing and some of the other things that I do. So next one, 3, white balance. Y'all, white balance. And if you don't know what white balance is, it's basically telling your camera what is a true white. Because cameras tend to focus on like you can actually see this in real time on, oh my gosh, it's like I'm doing this on purpose. So basically, I record my podcast next to a window because natural light really is the best way to get light on your show. And I'm realizing, looking at myself, that actually there's a lot of reflection on my glasses. So I'm probably going to be looking at the camera. Maybe that'll help. Anyway, so basically white balance is telling the camera what is a true white because there's a lot of sensors on your camera. And for whatever reason, sometimes in the beginning, I was just so focused in like making sure that I was looking at the camera, making sure that there was nothing on the screen on like behind me, or just focusing on the interview, or focusing on actually feeling, excited and just with a good train of thought onto the podcast. And what ended up happening was that I sometimes would forget to do white balance. And basically my image was way too yellow, or it never got like way too green, but it definitely got way too yellow. And so you can apply a lot of effects, but if you have a lot of light changing as right now, it's really hard to change the camera light and the white balance and all of that, the color warmth, let's call it like that, because this is happening in real time. And so as you look around in the sun, sometimes there's overcast, there's a lot going on. And so sometimes I would forget. I was like, okay, I changed the input, I changed the output, I have my notes, I practiced, I put my phone on silent, and I completely forget to do white balance. I normally would go and make sure that, the contrast was decent, but sometimes I forget about the white balance. And then I was like, oh, this is not great. But again, let's go. And so it's just all about, making sure that is that really relevant to what I'm teaching? Not so much, especially as my audio podcast is my priority. All right, number 4, I actually do not wear any makeup. I'm not wearing any makeup right now. And that is not for me. That is for you. And I used to be a producer on a podcast studio, and so many women would come to me and they say, oh my God, how does my makeup look? And I'm a feminist, and I truly believe that women don't need to put on makeup to look professional. And a lot of the times I don't wear makeup on a regular basis. And I think that it's so important to lead by example. And I cannot tell you hey, you don't have to put on a face of makeup and put your hair, especially because that is one of the reasons so many people don't start video, because they're like, well, I have to put on makeup, I have to, do my hair, all of that. If you, by seeing me, be successful without wearing makeup, having the confidence to show up without, that is so much more powerful, and it shows an example, right? And so that, I thought from the get-go, was super important for me to convey as a message. as a subliminal message and as a direct image on the screen, immediate moment kind of thing, right? Like, I don't wear makeup intentionally because I don't want you to think that the perfect, quote unquote, the perfect podcast has to be a podcast where you look like you're just going to a TV show. These are podcasts. They are supposed to be intimate. So sometimes if I wear makeup, it's because I creatively want to wear makeup and not because I feel that I have to. All right, number 5, the camera isn't perfect. A lot of times, you're supposed to show your hands on the monitor, and I'm just looking at my notes. Hang on a second. So you're not supposed to see what my hands are like right now. You're supposed to actually be a little higher up. And the camera is supposed to be at eye level, and you're supposed to be like see a little bit of the arms, and you're not supposed to have more than like, you're supposed to have like 4 fingers away from like the top of the shot. Again, all of these things that I used to do for other people in a podcast studio. Now I'm like, whatever. Like, I physically install my sign, I have my table, even though I move it around every now and again, like sometimes I cannot get the right shot. I am not spending 20 minutes setting up a camera and losing 20 minutes of precious time just to create a cinematic experience or just like do the quote unquote the proper way. To me, it's more important that I do record that episode on video format so that I am able to put that on YouTube to connect with you deeper on a video format so that I can have clips for social media so that I can just show you a lot of these things. Gosh, I'm really struggling to record this one with like just my voice going in and out. All right, number 6, not having the right equipment. I see a lot of people not wanting to start a podcast because, quote unquote, their microphone isn't what, Tim Ferriss's use. And I'm like, the microphone is not what's going to give you clients. The microphone is not what's going to give you sponsors. Like, I truly believe this. I don't have a fancy audio interface. My microphone plugs in directly to my laptop. My camera has a direct connection to my computer as well. I am not spending thousands of dollars. I'd rather invest that money in either getting myself an editor, paying for maybe audio ads or whenever I do that. To me, getting all of this content out there is more important than having, this setup that everybody who's famous has. Like, that literally is not a reason to not podcast or podcast to the level you want. And then deeply connected to that is reason number 7, which is your audience isn't big enough yet to invest in video. And what I mean to invest in video is sometimes buying a camera and just investing your own time in either learning how to edit video and putting the content on YouTube. By the way, I have an episode on that. I'll leave that in the show notes. I think it's episode 12, 15 considerations before you start a video podcast. That is so, so important. Start before you're ready is, a quote that is very used for a reason, right? And basically, I want you to consider like, hey, doing things now, like, and this is so, so important to talk about. Right now, I'm recording this on at the end of the year. And so many people tell me, oh my gosh, and so many good things are happening to you. Like, honestly, these last quarter of the year has been insane for me in a good way. I've onboarded new clients on my podcast program. I have been able to partner up with brands. I just had a meetup with podcasters and organized by Riverside. It was so, so awesome. But the quality of my content has not changed since I launched the podcast space back in 2020, in January of 2020. I'm going to be doing soon 4 years of creating this professionally from day one. I wanted to leave a legacy of content that no matter my audience, like again, we all start with 0 listeners, right? And we start with 0 followers on social media, with 0 newsletter subscribers. And if you get used to delivering the best possible content to the one person, when you start growing, when people start coming to you, it's so much better, and you will not get that imposter syndrome. You will doubt yourself a lot less because you've had that practice of creating content. Again, don't get me wrong. I am super grateful that brands are coming to me now and saying, Anna, we've been following you for a few years. We would love to work with you, right? And sometimes it wasn't because they didn't come to me before because I didn't have a podcast, or maybe because our topics, our agendas didn't meet up. And so now people are coming to me and I'm like, damn right, because I'm creating amazing content. And so when my podcast starts hitting the 1,000 downloads per month, the 1,000 unique listeners per month, I am not going to be flinching because I'm like, yes, I am creating content that is imperfect. I have not changed that, but there's so much value in each episode that I'm releasing, in each post. And so I know that when people are coming to me, they already have an expectation of what they're going to get. I'm not going to suddenly like crap over the quality of my content. I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. And so important that you just focus again on the what is the purpose of the content I'm creating versus the ego. So if you've been wanting to do video podcasts and you're like, Anna, I only have 3 followers. Well, YouTube right now is one of the biggest search engines in the world. So I had a few people come to me and say, hey, I found you on YouTube. Amazing, right? And so again, you may be someone else's guest, but don't stop just because your audience is too small. All right, number 8. I hear this all the time. Anna, I cannot start a podcast because I still need to get, like proper training, quote unquote, proper training on podcasting. I cannot go and just do it. And I'm like, well, if you were to be asked, hey, can you do a talk on this? You wouldn't say, no, I have to get training and then I can do a talk on this. You would just go and do it, right? And so that is the same thing. You have to look at your podcast as more of a public-facing speaking engagement that you're doing to strangers on the internet. Hey, criticism will at some point come. Like, I don't think anyone is immune to criticism. So if that's something that has been holding you back, if you think like you don't have proper training, you think that you're lacking, maybe you don't have the credentials to speak about something, well, look, if you are doing a business about that one thing that you're talking about, you have enough credentials to do it. Now, of course, if you're telling me that you're teaching people how to, like, I don't know, stitch yourself if you cut yourself, maybe not. But if it's a business-related thing, just go ahead and do it. And then last but not least, not inviting your dream guests on your podcast because you don't think that you're ready, because you think, I have to improve my show. I will tell you just about these 2 situations. One, I'll tell you that I have already crossed off my list 4 of my 10 dream guests that I've always wanted to interview for a podcast. And I've been able to do that because, one, I was already in that person's world, so I was already engaging. There were some situations where I was able to meet them in person, and so that really helped me get to them. I was sure nervous, but the truth is I didn't wait until I had thousands and thousands of downloads to actually talk to them and invite them on the show. Now, the thing that I want to tell you, the second thing, is that you shouldn't really, I would advise you to never get your like big dream guests on your first, 10 episodes if you've never podcasted before. And I had this situation with a client. And of course, I don't bash on people, right? But this person was really ambitious and they just wanted to use the podcast as like a networking tool because they wanted to do business with the people who he was interviewing. And so he actually was so nervous because he never podcasted before. He didn't do a trial run. And just the fact that he didn't know how to do any of this. Plus, he was interviewing people who had a lot of weight in the future of his business. He needed to meet these people in order to just get contracts or get connected to the right people. Those interviews were train wrecks. They were really bad because he just was so worried about his ego, about like not being good enough. And so he was not even enjoying the interview. He was not making those interpersonal connections that are so important. So I'm not saying wait until you have 1,000 downloads per episode. I am saying don't invite those people right away, but do make sure that in between the starting the show and the being able to have those people over, it hasn't been 2 years, 3 years. And so, for instance, if you're wanting to interview Dolly Parton or someone else, just send the goddamn email. Like, really do send it. If your dream guest was to disappear tomorrow or go and be a hermit in the mountains and never talk to anyone, you're like, I never had the courage to send them an email. I've heard a few people who I initially thought, wow, they are on so-and-so's podcast and they have a smaller podcast, but they were there because they had a personal connection, or maybe they knew someone who knew someone. So don't wait to have the perfect podcast to invite them over. And then before we finish, I want to remind you that, again, not having the qualifications, that's not an excuse. You can tailor the podcast experience as like you're on your own learning journey and you're bringing people with you. And then obviously the last is don't wait until you have the right numbers or your podcast is perfect and you're exceptionally phenomenal at presenting a podcast and hosting a show and providing an experience before you invite your dream guests. Do it now. At least send that email, right? So I think that's all I have for you. I cannot believe that I've been able to hold this whole show. A few coughings along the way, but definitely something that I've been wanting to do for a while. Talk about the imperfections. Talk about like really how imperfect this show is every single week and how I still deliver content to you every single week. All right? Okay. I've been Anna Xavier. I want to hear from you at the podcast space on Instagram. Please let me know your ahas if you were not expecting all of these perfectionism things to come out on this episode and you're identifying a ton of them. Do let me know which ones you resonated with. I would love to hear from you. And again, if you want help to grow your podcast, I'm here for hire. You can hire me to grow your podcast. So reach out to me at the podcast space. Of course, every single thing that I mentioned on this episode will be available in the show notes and at thepodcastspace.com/podcast. This is episode 46, and I've been just so honored that you chose to spend some of your time with me today. All right, I can't wait to hear from you, and just keep creating content that's imperfect but moves you forward. I'll see you in the next episode.